I thought a routine day would end like any other, until I walked into my kitchen and found my wife with the plumber. That discovery was just the beginning of secrets I never saw coming. I'm Mark, 35, married to Lisa, who's 33. We've been together for about 8 years, and on the surface, everything seemed good. Or, at least, I thought it was. Lisa and I were the kind of couple people would look at and think, they've got it all. We shared a nice home, a pretty peaceful life, and routines that felt steady, comforting even. But, looking back now, maybe that was part of the problem, it was too routine. I worked long hours, and she handled most things at home. I trusted her completely, and she always seemed like she had things under control. Then a few weeks ago, little things started to feel off. She was on her phone a lot more, and not just the usual scrolling. She'd get up and leave the room to take calls, which she'd never done before. And if I walked into a room unexpectedly, I'd catch her slipping her phone into her pocket or giving me that tight, forced smile. But, I shrugged it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was just planning a surprise or something silly. But as it turned out, my gut was trying to tell me something very real. After those first few days of noticing small changes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lisa was on edge, more than I'd ever seen her before. She'd snap at me over little things or act distracted, even when we were having a simple conversation. One night, I decided to ask her if everything was okay. I casually brought it up, trying not to sound like I was accusing her of anything. "Hey, you seem a little, I don't know, preoccupied lately," I said. "Is there something going on?" She looked up, a little too quickly, and laughed it off. "Oh, it's nothing, really," she said, brushing her hair back and giving me one of those practiced smiles. "Just some things I'm organizing for the house. You know how it is." I tried to push the doubts aside, telling myself I was overthinking. But her behavior kept getting stranger. She started making excuses to be home alone during the day, even though she usually enjoyed being out, visiting friends, or running errands. One morning, she asked me if I could stay late at work because she had someone coming by to fix the kitchen faucet, which had started leaking a week before. "Just need a little more time to tidy up," she said, waving her hand dismissively. I didn't think much of it at first. But there was a little voice in the back of my mind, telling me that something about this faucet repair wasn't quite right. And as it turned out, that little voice was right. So, that morning, I went off to work as usual, planning to stay late like Lisa had asked. But around lunchtime, I got an unexpected call from my boss saying that our afternoon meeting had been cancelled. Suddenly, I found myself with the entire afternoon free. I figured I'd surprise Lisa, maybe grab us lunch, and come home early for once. I thought it'd be a nice little gesture, a chance to shake up our routine. On the drive back, I felt that mix of excitement and curiosity. I hadn't told Lisa I was coming home early, so I pictured her surprised smile when she'd see me walk through the door. I imagined we'd sit together in the kitchen, maybe talk about the things that had been keeping her busy. I hoped it would be a chance to reconnect, to clear up whatever weird tension had been hanging in the air lately. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a white van parked just up the street. It looked like the kind of van you'd see a plumber or electrician driving. I didn't think much of it, after all, Lisa had told me about the plumber fixing the faucet, so I figured he'd parked nearby. But as I walked toward the front door, I noticed something strange. The van didn't have any company logo, no name on the side, nothing that suggested it was an official business vehicle. I brushed it off, though, telling myself I was being paranoid. When I opened the front door and stepped inside, I was met with silence. The house was eerily quiet, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something about that silence didn't feel right. I set the takeout bag on the counter, listening closely, and that's when I heard it, a faint, muffled sound coming from the kitchen. My heart started pounding as I walked toward the noise, feeling a mixture of dread and confusion. I didn't know what to expect, but something told me that whatever I was about to find wasn't going to be good. As I approached the kitchen, the muffled sounds grew clearer. At first, I couldn't make out what I was hearing, but then a low, familiar laugh cut through the air. It was Lisa's laugh, but different. Softer, flirtier. I felt my stomach tighten as I realized she wasn't alone. I stopped just short of the kitchen doorway, bracing myself, barely able to breathe. Peering around the corner, I caught sight of Lisa standing close, too close, to a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a work shirt and jeans, holding a wrench in one hand, but he wasn't fixing the faucet. They were standing right by the sink, wrapped up in each other. She was smiling, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then she leaned in, and he kissed her. In that moment, everything shattered. The image I'd held of us, of our marriage, came crashing down. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some stranger, it was my wife. My wife, in our kitchen, with a man who'd come to fix our faucet. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to storm in, to confront them, to shout, but another part of me just stood there, frozen in place, watching my world fall apart. I couldn't understand it. Why would she do this? Who was this guy, and how had things gone this far? And yet, I stayed silent, hidden, as they continued, totally unaware of my presence. I knew then that this wasn't just some misunderstanding. Something had been going on behind my back, and I needed to know just how deep it ran. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't stand there another second. All the shock and anger erupted, and before I knew it, I was storming into the kitchen. They both jumped, startled, as I appeared, my face red with rage. Lisa's eyes went wide, and the plumber took a step back, completely thrown off guard. What the hell is going on here? I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. The guy stammered, but I didn't wait for him to respond. Grabbing him by the shirt, I shoved him toward the door. Get out. Now, I growled, practically dragging him through the house by the scruff of his neck. He stumbled, muttering a hurried apology, but I didn't want to hear it. I opened the door and shoved him outside without another word, slamming it behind him. Turning back, I found Lisa still standing there, stunned. I walked up to her, my anger boiling over. Pack your things, I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. I want you out of this house. Now. Mark, please, she started, reaching for my arm. But I pulled back, my voice shaking with fury. Don't. Don't you dare try to explain this. I trusted you, and this is what you do. With some guy who came here to fix our sink. She stood there, trying to come up with something to say, but I'd already heard enough. The betrayal, the lies, it all felt like too much. I couldn't even look at her, every part of me feeling raw and broken. Pack your things, I said again, emphasizing each word. And get out. And in that moment, I realized everything was over. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called a lawyer. If Lisa thought I was just going to let this betrayal slide, she was wrong. My mind kept replaying everything, the shock of walking in on them, the lies, and the audacity of it all. I'd given her everything, and now, I was going to take it all back. I explained everything to my lawyer, Ryan. I want to file for divorce, I told him, and I want to make sure I get everything. Ryan listened carefully, nodding as I laid out the details, including the marriage contract Lisa and I had signed. The contract, in black and white, had a clause that stated that if either of us was unfaithful, the entire estate would go to the innocent party. All we need is proof of the infidelity, Ryan said, leaning forward thoughtfully. That contract is rock solid, Mark. If we can establish betrayal beyond a doubt, then the house, the savings, everything is yours. Hearing this gave me a sense of control, a plan, a path forward. I handed him my phone with photos I'd taken of the scene the day before, along with the security footage from our home camera system, which showed the plumber entering and leaving under suspicious circumstances. With Ryan's guidance, I began gathering every bit of evidence I could. This wasn't going to be easy, and I knew Lisa would probably fight back. But I was prepared for that. She'd made her choice, and now I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of it. No more lies, no more cover-ups, I was ready to see this through. With Ryan's encouragement, I doubled down on gathering proof. I combed through text records, bank statements, anything that might show Lisa's connection to the plumber or any suspicious behavior in recent months. I discovered more than I expected: transactions for pricey restaurants, expensive gifts, even a hotel stay billed to her credit card that I knew wasn't for me. Each piece of evidence built a clearer picture of how far her betrayal had gone. Ryan assured me that we were building a strong case. "Between your photos, the security footage, and the transactions, we're in good shape," he said. "This should be more than enough to support the infidelity clause in your marriage contract." Still, I wanted to be sure. I hired a private investigator to see if there was any other evidence of contact between Lisa and the plumber. If she'd been hiding this affair, I wanted every single fact exposed. A few days later, Lisa reached out. She had left the house on the day of the confrontation, and I hadn't seen her since. Now, she wanted to talk things through. She sent messages and even tried calling, but I ignored every attempt. She'd shattered my trust, and the only communication I was willing to have with her was through the legal process. When I didn't respond, she sent me a long email. In it, she tried to explain herself, claiming it was a one-time mistake and begging me to not let one moment destroy everything we've built. Reading her words, I felt a surge of anger. One moment. She was trying to brush aside her betrayal as if it were nothing, as if it hadn't ripped our life apart. I forwarded the email to Ryan, knowing it was more fuel for our case. Her words sounded hollow, desperate. I could tell she knew what was at stake, but she had no idea of the extent of my plan. A week later, the private investigator returned with more information. He'd confirmed that Lisa and the plumber had been in contact well before the day I caught them. Text records showed that they'd met several times and even exchanged flirtatious messages. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, as she tried to convince me. This was a full-blown affair that had been going on under my nose for months. With this new evidence, I felt a mixture of anger and relief. I now had all the proof I needed. Ryan was confident that we could move forward and that our case was rock solid. Lisa had tried to keep her betrayal hidden, but now, every lie was out in the open. The next step was serving Lisa with divorce papers. Ryan and I filed the paperwork, citing infidelity and requesting full ownership of our assets as per our marriage contract. When she received the papers, I finally got a text from her, and this time, her tone was different. She accused me of overreacting, claiming that I was trying to ruin her life over one mistake. Her deflection only fueled my determination. I reminded her that she'd signed the contract willingly and that she'd be held accountable for her choices. For the first time, she seemed to realize just how serious I was. She tried calling again, but I didn't answer. I'd made up my mind. The initial hearing was tense. Lisa showed up with her own lawyer, trying to argue that her actions didn't constitute significant infidelity under the contract's terms. Her lawyer attempted to downplay the affair, suggesting that it didn't justify the drastic measures outlined in our agreement. Ryan countered her arguments with the mountain of evidence we'd collected. He laid out every detail: the photos, the security footage, the financial transactions, and the investigator's report. We painted a clear picture of betrayal, showing that Lisa's actions were not only intentional but ongoing. The judge listened carefully, taking in each piece of evidence. I could see Lisa's face change as she realized that her usual tactics, charm and persuasion, were useless here. She had tried to manipulate and downplay the truth, but there was no escaping the evidence. After the hearing, Lisa reached out one last time. She wanted to settle things amicably and suggested we could rework the contract terms. Her tone was desperate now, pleading. She knew the outcome wasn't in her favor, and she was trying to salvage whatever she could. But I was done compromising. I knew that agreeing to anything less than the full terms of the contract would mean letting her off the hook, and after everything she'd done, I refused to give her that satisfaction. I told her that I intended to see the legal process through to the end. I would take everything. A few weeks later, the court finally issued its decision. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full ownership of the house, our shared assets, and everything else outlined in the contract. Lisa's attempts to downplay her actions had failed, and the evidence was undeniable. She would walk away with nothing, exactly what she'd gambled with when she decided to betray me. As the ruling was announced, I felt a wave of relief. I'd fought for justice, and I'd won. Lisa looked stunned, unable to comprehend the reality of the situation. This was the end of her lies, her manipulation, and her life as she'd known it. In the days that followed, I began the process of moving forward. I sold the house and relocated, putting as much distance as I could between myself and the life I'd shared with Lisa. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere that wouldn't remind me of her betrayal. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of closure. I'd taken back control of my life, and I was free from the weight of her deceit. The lessons from this experience had been painful, but I'd learned to trust my instincts and value my own peace above all else. Looking back, I realized how much I'd changed. I was no longer the trusting, oblivious husband I'd once been. I'd learned to see through deception, to stand up for myself, and to fight for what I deserved. Lisa had tried to keep everything hidden, to manipulate and downplay the truth, but in the end, the truth had come out. To anyone listening, I'd say this: trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never settle for anything less than honesty and respect. Betrayal can break you if you let it, but it can also teach you your own strength. And in the end, that strength is worth more than anything. With the divorce finally behind me, I was ready to close this chapter and move on. I had my peace, the assets, and the freedom to start fresh. But just as I began to settle into my new life, something completely unexpected happened. One evening, I was out with friends, celebrating the end of this long ordeal, when my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. I opened it, and to my shock, it was a message from Lisa. Despite everything, she was reaching out, but the tone was unlike anything I'd expected. Her message read, "Mark, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. But something's happened, and I think you should know." Against my better judgment, I decided to read on. She explained that the plumber, the man I'd walked in on with her, hadn't just been a mistake. Apparently, he had been deceiving her, too, feeding her promises and lies, all while using their relationship to take advantage of her financially. Lisa confessed that after the divorce, she'd found herself in a dire situation. Not only had she lost everything in the settlement, but she'd also discovered that the plumber had conned her out of what little she had left. He had taken advantage of her vulnerabilities, stringing her along, only to leave her with nothing. She ended her message with, "I know I deserve this, but I never thought he'd betray me too. I just thought you should know, for whatever it's worth." Reading her message, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her face the fallout of her own choices. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, felt a small pang of empathy. Despite everything, it was painful to think that she had been used and discarded by someone she trusted. Yet at the same time, I knew this wasn't my battle. I'd fought for my own justice, taken my stand, and moved forward. Lisa's choices had led her down this path, and whatever consequences she was now facing were hers alone to bear. I decided not to respond, but I also felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. Lisa's message showed me that her actions had ultimately led her to the same betrayal and loneliness she'd once inflicted on me. It wasn't revenge, but in a strange way, it was justice. In the weeks that followed, I found a new peace. The chapter with Lisa was finally, completely closed. I'd heard her side, understood the consequences she was now facing, and felt more certain than ever that I'd made the right choice. My life was now open, free from the lies and betrayals that had once clouded it. And with that final twist, I knew I could truly move forward, embracing a new beginning that was entirely my own. As much as I'd tried to let it go, Lisa's message about the plumber gnawed at me. The man who had betrayed me, destroyed my marriage, and even conned Lisa was out there, probably living his life without a care in the world. And while I had no sympathy for Lisa's situation, knowing that he'd done this to others and could easily do it again infuriated me. I couldn't shake the thought that this guy, this so-called plumber, had come into my home, destroyed my life, and then walked away without consequences. So I made a decision: I was going to expose him for who he really was. With some digging, I discovered that he wasn't just a regular plumber, he had a reputation in the area for taking advantage of vulnerable clients. Rumors online hinted that he'd conned a few people, using his charm to gain their trust and access to their homes. I was determined to uncover his lies and bring his whole act crashing down. I started my search by speaking to some of his former clients. Posing as a potential customer, I reached out to people who had left bad reviews about his services. Sure enough, their complaints painted a similar picture: he'd overcharged, done substandard work, and left many of them with unfinished repairs. Some of the women hinted that he'd been uncomfortably friendly, or even flirtatious. A few of these clients were more than willing to talk, especially when they realized that I was gathering evidence against him. I documented every conversation, every receipt, and every complaint. Piece by piece, I was building a case that could expose his pattern of deceit. One evening, I received a message from one of the women I'd contacted. She told me she'd found a document in her email, a fake invoice he'd sent her, padded with charges for work he'd never done. It was exactly the type of evidence I needed to prove that his business practices weren't just unethical but likely illegal. With this document, I had the final piece of the puzzle. I took everything to a lawyer, who confirmed that we had enough to report him to both the local authorities and consumer protection agencies. The plumber's operation was about to face serious scrutiny, and I knew it wouldn't be long before his whole act fell apart. Before reporting him, I decided to confront him directly. I wanted to see his reaction, to let him know that his actions had consequences. I showed up at his latest job site, unannounced. When he saw me, his face paled, and he immediately went on the defensive, saying, "Hey, man, I didn't mean any harm. I thought things were over between you and Lisa." "Don't flatter yourself," I replied coldly. "This isn't about Lisa. This is about you taking advantage of people, breaking into their lives, destroying relationships, and leaving them to pick up the pieces." He tried to play innocent, but I could see the panic in his eyes as I told him about the evidence I'd gathered, about the women he'd scammed and the authorities I was preparing to notify. His smirk faded as he realized he couldn't talk his way out of this one. With everything in place, I submitted the evidence to both local law enforcement and consumer protection agencies. I made sure his actions were exposed online too, sharing the experiences of his former clients and warning others in the community. Within weeks, word of his deed spread. He lost clients, faced investigations, and eventually, his business folded under the weight of his reputation. The plumber who had once thought he could get away with anything was now facing the consequences of his actions. Taking action against him didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me a sense of justice, a feeling that the scales had finally balanced. He'd caused harm, lied, and manipulated people for his own gain, and now he was dealing with the fallout. Knowing that I'd helped prevent others from going through what I had brought me a new sense of peace. For the first time, I felt I could truly let go of the anger, the betrayal, and the past. I'd stood up for myself, held him accountable, and finally reclaimed control over my life. With the plumber out of the picture and my past finally behind me, I felt lighter. I'd taken the power back from those who tried to ruin my life, and I was ready to move forward, free from the shadow of betrayal. As I looked to the future, I realized that this whole experience had made me stronger, more resilient, and more aware of my own worth. I'd learned to trust myself, to protect my peace, and to never let anyone take advantage of my kindness again. For anyone listening, I'd say this: sometimes the best closure is taking back control and standing up for yourself. And while life might throw you unexpected twists, you can always find your way forward, even if it means rebuilding from scratch. A few months after I'd exposed the plumber's scams, I received a call from my lawyer with news I hadn't expected. The plumber, the same guy who had wrecked my marriage and manipulated countless people, had been arrested and sentenced to prison. Apparently, the weight of the evidence I'd collected, along with testimonies from other victims, had led to a full investigation. As it turned out, his schemes had gone much deeper than I'd realized. He wasn't just an untrustworthy contractor, he had committed outright fraud, falsifying documents, billing clients for services he never provided, and even stealing from some of the properties he'd entered under the guise of repair work. His charm and confidence had helped him dodge suspicion for years, but now, he was finally facing the consequences. My lawyer explained that he'd been charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft, enough to put him away for a significant amount of time. Hearing this news, I felt a wave of relief. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, and I knew that his ability to hurt others was officially over. I shared the news with a few close friends and family members who had supported me throughout the ordeal. They'd seen how much this betrayal had affected me, and knowing that justice had been served brought them a sense of closure too. "It's about time he got what he deserved," one of my friends said. "You did the right thing, Mark. Not just for yourself, but for everyone else he could have taken advantage of." Hearing those words, I realized how much this journey had taught me, not just about betrayal, but about the strength it takes to stand up for yourself, even when it's painful and difficult. A few days later, I received another unexpected message, from Lisa. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce proceedings, and I wasn't sure I wanted to now. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. "Mark," she wrote, "I heard what happened to him. I can't believe I fell for his lies and lost everything because of him. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you. What you did stopped him from hurting anyone else." Reading her message, I felt a strange sense of closure. She had finally admitted her role in the whole mess, and although her apology couldn't erase the pain she'd caused, it felt like a small step toward letting go. I didn't reply, but I took a deep breath, realizing that I'd finally made peace with both Lisa and the betrayal. In exposing the plumber, I had freed myself, and now, even she could see the impact of my actions. With everything behind me, I focused on moving forward. The plumber's prison sentence, Lisa's apology, and the support of my friends and family had given me a new sense of confidence and clarity. I poured my energy into building a life that was stronger and more authentic than anything I'd had before. As I reflected on the journey, I realized that I had grown in ways I hadn't expected. The betrayal had tested me, but it had also shown me my own resilience. I no longer felt weighed down by anger or regret. I was free. To anyone listening, my story is a reminder that betrayal can be devastating, but it doesn't have to define you. You have the strength to stand up, to fight back, and to rebuild. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes people will let you down, but in the end, you're stronger than you know. This journey taught me that justice, while not always swift, is real. And that peace is something you can reclaim, even when it feels impossible. As time went on, life took an unexpected turn for the better. The years after the divorce were filled with ups and downs, but I'd finally started to feel at peace. I'd moved on from the betrayal, rebuilt my life, and, surprisingly, found someone new. Her name was Anna. She was kind, supportive, and a breath of fresh air after everything I'd been through. Anna knew my story, and from day one, she showed me that love could be real, honest, and comforting. She helped me open up, to believe and trust again. We got close quickly, and before long, it was clear that we were building a future together. A year into our relationship, I proposed. Standing there with Anna, looking into her eyes, I felt a hope I hadn't known in years. She said yes, and that yes changed everything. Not long after, we found out we were expecting our first child. I was overjoyed, filled with a sense of purpose and excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. My life, once full of turmoil, had transformed into something beautiful and fulfilling. Just as I was settling into this new chapter, I received news that shook me. A mutual friend reached out with information about Lisa that I hadn't expected to hear. It turned out that during her affair with the plumber, the very relationship that had torn my world apart, she'd ended up pregnant. Apparently, she'd only discovered the pregnancy after our divorce had been finalized and after the plumber had been arrested and sent to prison. The news hit me harder than I expected. This was a child, an innocent life caught in the middle of everything. I couldn't imagine what Lisa must have felt, learning she was carrying a child from a man who had betrayed her just as she betrayed me. Then came the final shock: Lisa had made the decision to terminate the pregnancy. Our mutual friend shared that Lisa had been conflicted, but with the plumber out of her life and her own future in ruins, she felt unprepared to raise a child. The news left me stunned. I didn't know whether to feel sorrow or anger, but one thing was clear: the child was blameless in all of this. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the life that would never be. Hearing about Lisa's pregnancy, and the choices she'd made, brought back a flood of emotions. But this time, I was in a different place. My anger had faded, and instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. Her actions had taken her down a painful road, and although I could still feel sadness for the innocent life caught in the storm, I knew there was nothing left to dwell on. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. Anna was there for me through it all, and I knew that together, we were building something lasting and true. I didn't need answers or revenge. I had found my peace, my love, and my family. As the months passed, my focus shifted to preparing for fatherhood. I channeled my energy into our growing family, embracing the joy and excitement of bringing a new life into the world. My love for Anna and our unborn child filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. The past, with all its hurt and betrayal, had finally released its hold on me. Our baby's arrival felt like a new beginning, a chance to create a life full of love, trust, and security. I'd learned so much from my journey, and I knew I would be a better partner and father because of it. Looking back, I realized how much I'd grown through the hardest times. Life had taken me through betrayal and heartbreak, but I'd emerged stronger and more resilient than I could have imagined. I found love again, built a family, and reclaimed my happiness. To anyone who's been betrayed, I'd say this: life has a way of balancing things out. The pain fades, and in its place, you find strength and peace you didn't know you had. My journey taught me that, no matter how dark things may seem, there's always light ahead, new beginnings, new love, and new hope. And as I looked at the family I'd built with Anna, I knew I'd finally found the happiness I deserved.